This podcast episode is made possible by wowdigital.com, your trusted partner for nonprofit and charity website and design. How can you transform your nonprofit's data into a powerhouse of engagement and stewardship? Stay tuned, listen to this episode, and find out. Welcome to the Nonprofit Digital Success Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, David, and in this episode, we're going to be talking all things nonprofit strategy and engagement with Beth Saunders. Beth is passionate about making missions happen. She partners with nonprofit leaders to connect people and programs to missions and goals. Her signature framework, called MapMoveMeasure, is a guide for channeling your experience, your expertise, and your data, yes, your data, to elevate stewardship and increase overall supporter engagement. Beth, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
It's great to be here with you, David. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess I'm always kind of a little bit curious, what drove you to working in nonprofits?
I believe that I might be a little different than some of the other consultants that started in nonprofit and did fundraising for years and years. I grew up in the corporate banking world. And after umpty-ump years of that, decided and realized I was looking for a little more meaning. And it really struck me. I call it my Salisbury Hill moment. And the reason for that, you're smiling, so hopefully you got the reference. And for those of you who didn't, it's Peter Gabriel, Salisbury Hill. I was literally on a really big adventure vacation and I was hiking in the Andes Mountains. And I just had this moment where I was completely alone on the trail. And I just looked around me and noticed how big the world is and how small we are, and that I really wanted the little time I had here to make more difference. I wanted to contribute and make an impact and not just be a grain of sand. So I came back from that trip and joined AmeriCorps Vista. That's how I transitioned out of the corporate world into the nonprofit space. And I guess the rest is history,
Yeah, I think part of that is, I think there's different times in our lives, right? As we age, that we're like, all right, there's a little bit of a legacy piece. How am I leaving my mark on the world? How am I helping? What am I doing? Not everybody's there. It's not for everybody, that's for sure. It's hard to chase for financial reasons, right? Nonprofits are typically underfunded, even though they do really amazing work. Anybody listening to this is probably going, yes, you're right, David. That's exactly what's going on. I like working with nonprofits because I know that we're doing really good work for them and helping them fulfill their mission and their goals and their ambitions and why they started as a nonprofit to begin with. So I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would just say there that, for those folks that have a commercial or corporate background, I was pretty easily able to transfer that and actually started doing project management work. And I look back and I think what I was doing was solving business problems using technology. It really translated into the nonprofit space, which then later translated into consulting back to the nonprofit space. So it's been a really fulfilling journey.
That's awesome. All right. So in your intro, I mentioned MapMoveMeasure framework. So I guess what are the key elements of that and how could nonprofits use that to maybe enhance digital marketing efforts?
Sure. MapMoveMeasure is something I came up with to make strategy more approachable. Sometimes we hear strategy and the only thing that comes to mind is strategic planning. And that's the most familiar form of strategy, at least in the nonprofit sector, I would argue. And while that process is important, it's not the only strategy. And I also think that hearing the word strategy can sometimes make people just feel a little like they're suffocating. It's a little heavy. MapMoveMeasure is a framework. And it's doing is drawing out three key components of engagement strategy, of which two really important are bookends. The bookends are a vision map, which is my version of a theory of change. So if you're familiar with theory of change, it's about really mapping outcomes that depict your theory for how you will make change. And that's what nonprofits are all about, making positive change in the world. So a vision map makes that big theoretical process very tangible. So that's the map. And the measure, I'll jump to the other bookend, is using a framework called the engagement pyramid, which was pioneered by the founder of Roundwire Consulting years ago. And this pyramid is really about drawing on your data in order to understand how much people want to engage in your mission work to help you achieve your goals. So there's different levels of engagement. And we say engagement, not donor support or volunteer. It's because it's all the ways people engage. And then we connect the outcomes that a nonprofit is trying to achieve with all the different ways people can engage and that we measure in the pyramid, we connect that by moving. So move is what a nonprofit is actually doing. It's not moves management, but we all understand moves management. So it's about moving people, your supporters, through a really personalized journey, inviting them to participate in your mission. So you invite them to help achieve goals that they share with you, and you measure their engagement so that you can always make the right offer at the right time. So that's MapMoveMeasure. And this framework, quite frankly, amplifies any and all strategies that a nonprofit has: digital marketing strategy, fundraising strategy, communication strategy, because it's keeping you laser focused on what you're trying to achieve.
I love the idea of going, all right, here's where we are, here's where we want to be. Let's connect that and then tie that back to the people that we need to engage. How can we emotionally invest people in what we're doing? And a lot of that, I think, comes through storytelling, impact statements, talking about where it is that you're working, what you're doing, how you're helping. And oh, by the way, you can also be a part of this, either through time, money, both, volunteering, even just sharing this to your network and letting people know, hey, this is something that somebody is spending time and effort trying to do and help.
That's exactly it. And, what you said is you can help, and people want to help because they share your goals. So if I want to make the same change that nonprofit is working to make, I'm going to be more likely to say yes when they invite me to make a gift, or invite me to volunteer, or invite me to take an advocacy action, invite me to join on social media. And I call these things invitations because your supporters actually want to be invited. They want to be welcomed in. When the nonprofit practitioners and leaders are thinking about asks, suddenly becomes something that you can be afraid to do. You don't want to ask for too much, right? You don't want to just burden people or cause donor fatigue, as we hear about, right? But if you're inviting, it's exciting, and it's a very welcoming and warm feeling.
I think about like, hey, like let's go on a road trip together versus, hey, I need you to go and get snacks and pack your luggage and do this and buy a canteen and get a tent. And like it's a very different approach. Like, hey, can you do this versus, hey, come with us along with on the journey, the path that we're taking. Look, nonprofits are, my opinion, friendly, soft, warm, fuzzy. And the invitation, I think, speaks volumes to that.
I love that you said, I did call them journeys, but you talked about a car trip, and the vision map is literally a map for a reason. To me, it serves as a roadmap for all things. If folks are familiar with theory of change, they're probably more familiar with it on the program evaluation side, right? We use theory of change to know if our programs are effective and how effective. And theory of change is actually more than a basic logic model, but that's for another conversation. I like to think, I love this model of theory of change because I'm very goals focused. I'm motivated by achieving goals. And the thing is that if we only stay focused on the really big goal that we all know is our vision statement, it can just feel too big. Even your most committed donors might care about that vision and deep inside think, yeah, that's really going to take a long time to achieve. So the vision map creates a roadmap for how to get there by laying out shorter term goals. We're going to achieve these outcomes sooner. They're more tangible and they're more relatable to people as a result. And so you have this series of outcomes that will be achieved by that nonprofit. Whereas the vision is probably shared by a lot of other nonprofits, right? Like there's not only one in the whole world that envisions a world without hunger or envisions a world without poverty. I think most of us envision that and want that. But what will your nonprofit specifically achieve to move toward that vision? And that's what that roadmap, the vision map, does. It makes it very tangible and relatable for all of us, kind of regular people walking around every day. It motivates us to get more involved.
I know you talked about it moments ago. We're recording this on Thursday. 2 days ago, Tuesday, I did strategic planning for my agency. We do this every quarter. And when we look at this, we look at what is our 5-year plan. So that's like the vision. What's the 1-year plan? So the short term, or I guess near term. And then we do quarterly strat planning. And then we break that down following the EOS framework to create rocks for us to do? And what is it that our focus is as the business, as an agency, as a nonprofit? What are the things that you can do this quarter to get closer to the 1 year goal that will get you closer to the 5 year goal, and breaking it down to these micro tasks? And I find that that becomes really easy because then you're not thinking about this really big, hairy, audacious goal, right? You're thinking about what is the thing that's going to get me closer to that goal.
That's exactly the way I like to think about engagement strategy, which is what MapMoveMeasure is about. And it's different. MapMoveMeasure and engagement strategy are really great pre-strategic planning activity and post-strategic planning. So because as you go into a strategic plan, you're going to be thinking about everything around your business operations, your board structure, your funding mix, as a nonprofit, and a lot of things that are operational in addition to your mission work. So if you go into that with a clear roadmap of vision, like I said, not just a vision statement, which is obviously important, but a vision map, then your strategic planning is already more targeted. It's already more focused, and therefore will be more strategic than it would have been. Now, I don't know if anyone's ever seen a strategic plan that doesn't have like a goal around DEI anymore, or diversifying your funding model, right? Or expanding your funding mix, building a major giving program. These are some really common goals coming out of strategic planning, and engagement strategy is a way to help a nonprofit achieve those goals because it's engaging your supporters. We don't have to do it all. There's people who love us, love our goals, and want to get involved. So it's a really great, the way you approach it and making it shorter term, again, right? That's making things tangible and doable. I call it the accountability ceiling within the theory of change. Your vision's your vision, but what are you accountable for? And what are you going to be accountable for today, next year, and the year after? And that's where you get short, medium, and long-term goals.
If you're listening to this right now, take a look at your vision statement. Don't talk about your organization. Change it. Give yourself permission to change it. Change your vision statement to not talk about yourself, but to talk about the outcome that you want to achieve. Because then you're dealing with, here is the thing that we want to do. How are we going to get there? And that's the map. That's going to be your GPS pointing you, the guiding star towards how you're going to get there. And if you keep taking the tasks that you're doing, however big or small they are, and measuring that against, is this going to get us to do or accomplish this? Yes or no? Maybe it's not worth doing. You can leverage that in your decision making.
You don't need me here. You're saying it all. That's exactly how I like to talk about vision. And one thing I would add to what you just expressed, David, is that not only take a look at your vision and make sure it's not about your own organization, right? Your vision is the change you wish to see in the world. It's the change you wish to make. If it has action words in it, it's not a vision, it's a mission. So a vision is the result, and results, they're the end product. So try to take words out that end in ing. But the data piece of all of this, right, is like, how do we know we're achieving those outcomes? That's program evaluation. The engagement strategy that we're talking about today is still data informed, because when people get involved in your organization, you're tracking data. If you're entering a gift, you've tracked data. If you've entered in volunteer time, you've tracked data. The question is, are you measuring it? Because lots of nonprofits capture a lot of data. On digital, you could speak to this better than I can, I'm sure. There's aggregate data, and then there's authenticated. I call it authenticated, where I actually know the person, right? I know the individual that took the action. So you can know the number of website visitors or the number of Instagram followers. But what I like to be able to do is find out the actual visitor and relate that back to a constituent. And so you implement tools and invitations that a call to action that someone identifies themselves. And it doesn't have to only be your online donation form. Obviously, some of the most common digital interactions that we can measure are email newsletters, online gifts, signing up for volunteering, following on social media, if that's possible. That indicates that someone is beginning to engage. And then it's the nonprofit's job to provide a relevant call to action to invite them to become more engaged. So knowing the data is one thing, receiving and tracking it is one thing, measuring it, knowing what level of engagement that supporter is telling you they're at is important to help you make the correct next ask or invitation, if I follow my own language.
I love that you're talking about leveraging the data. I know that in a number of episodes, I've mentioned you need to run your nonprofit like it was a business. If you were a business that does heating and cooling and somebody called you saying, hey, my air conditioner is broken, I'm curious, how much is it going to cost? $3,000. Okay, see you later, right? Or whatever it happens to be. Instead of doing that, hey, can we come and take a look, see what the actual real problem is? Maybe you don't need a new one. Maybe there's a fuse that blew. You can engage with people in a way by understanding who they are, and you can have volunteers do this in your nonprofit. Donation comes in, you can have that volunteer do a search on social for this person, see if they're following you, see if you can do a DM to them. So it doesn't even have to be public, but see if you can connect with them and say, oh, thank you so much, Beth. Really appreciate the $30 you donated to us. Here's where the money is going to be used. This is the impact it's going to have. Thank you so much. Keep in touch or whatever, right? And then you can build a nurture series over time with them where you create essentially a CRM, a customer or client relationship management tool, so that you can store the data. We know that having a CRM in place will let future people in a similar role know what has happened previously.
Exactly. The first iteration of my consulting practice was helping nonprofits be successful using their CRM and building it out to be horizontal, right? Not a fundraising database, because that's a very narrow channel, but more of a CRM, as you said, constituent, customer, client relationship management. And that's where it's human centered. And that's what engagement's all about, is about developing not just a relationship, but a longer term, meaningful relationship. And it's longer term when somebody doesn't get bored, that there's a lot of ways to participate and it's interesting. So that's your engagement pyramid. You need a lot of different invitations, a lot of ways people can get involved, and not only in what they do, but in what role they play, right? So the role is advocate, volunteer, donor, board member. There's lots of ways. But in your CRM, you always know that this is David and he interacted with us in all of these different ways. If you have a donor database, you're usually tracking gifts and maybe making notes about other things. And notes are not really reportable or measurable. So I'm 2 thumbs up on the CRM.
Yeah, I think we need to think of donors as a continuum. It's not like they come in, they donate, that's it. What led them to donate? What is the psychographic behind the reason that they've made a donation? I have another episode 16, where I talk about psychographics and the importance of understanding that. So go listen to that after this. Don't leave right now. Stay here with Beth and I. Really understanding what is at the core of why they engage with you, either on social, with a donation, filling out a contact form on your website, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many reasons that people want to engage with you, and there's different personalities and rationalizations as to why. So having some kind of real data behind it for you to make informed decisions to go, oh, we did a fundraising charity car wash last year around this time, and these are the people that came. We had a clipboard, we had somebody there taking names, right, as people came through, and we're using that data to reach out to them to see what we might be able to do or not do with them moving forward.
That's a really great way to use digital and online technologies. So I said earlier that engagement strategy has a lot of different components, and MapMoveMeasure just makes it a little bit more doable. But all those other components include something you were just describing called a persona. So there's a market, there's audiences, and there's personas. And, that's also pretty academic. But you can make all of these things simpler and tangible by thinking of a persona by tracking what we call in the nonprofit world affinity. And it would be every nonprofit has a mission, and there's often more than one pillar within that mission. And so if you know the event, or in sometimes we call them campaigns, if you know what drew that person to your organization, and if it's online, you had a specific campaign and you were talking about one pillar of your mission, maybe you are in housing, but you also offer some education workshops or some after school care because, housing needs to be more all encompassing. Well, someone might have more affinity to childcare that enables the parent to work while they're in the housing than just the housing. So if you ran a campaign around that and you track that affinity, then your messaging to those supporters who responded to that campaign is more personal. Even though you send an aggregate message to all the people, it feels very personal because it was about that pillar of your affinity. So when you track affinity, and then you said earlier, like what brought that donor to the organization, often the first interaction is through volunteerism. And so if you have a way for people to volunteer and you aren't offering them to support you financially, you're really not only denying them the opportunity to help you more, but you're missing an opportunity yourself. So A lot of times people will volunteer before they give. It's a way to get to know you better. It's the beginning of a relationship. It's also why in the engagement pyramid that giving time is quality engagement, but it's actually a lower level of engagement before we say people giving money. Because giving money is a sign of really deep trust and commitment, where giving time is a little bit easier to do. So digital gives you the opportunity, right, to track that campaign or to track the form that they got filled out so that it can come into your CRM and then you can measure it more easily, where you have a lot more context around the transaction.
You touched on it a little bit in terms of some challenges that some organizations have. Do you see any other more common challenges that nonprofits face and how they could maybe overcome them leveraging data and strategic frameworks?
When I think about the biggest challenges, something that we've all heard about, and this is not necessarily about running a nonprofit, it's mindset. I think we're made to feel that, and a lot of us live with a scarcity mindset in the nonprofit space, which is why I'm really careful about the language I use. I started, but I mentioned ask versus invite. And when we are only tracking data and we're just constantly like in the hamster wheel of getting stuff done and getting that data entered and getting more stuff done and entering more data, it's because we're never looking up. So if you're always looking down, and you're just getting through your day and getting your work done, you're probably living in a scarcity mindset. Like, I don't have the luxury of time to zoom out and get a bigger view. And so something I think nonprofit practitioners can do is just start by changing your language. Think of every appeal and ask as an invitation and an offer. Actually focus on vision more, or at least as much as you focus on mission. Because when you focus on vision, you can't help but look up. I mean, I almost challenge anybody to think about their vision statement without looking up and then talk about what they're achieving. When you talk about achievements and outcomes, it's also coming more from abundance than thinking about all the things we need to do, which is stuff that isn't done yet. And that's scarcity. And I also think scarcity comes into play when we think we can't afford to do certain things, or we don't have all this sophisticated social media technology, or our website is just a one pager. There's no just, there's no only, there's no it's not enough. I always encourage do the absolute best that you can to achieve the most that you can with what you have. And then you will achieve your goals. So work within your means and you can still achieve a lot.
Absolutely. There's so many advancements in technology, certainly with artificial intelligence and different platforms that exist out there to help you try to do the stuff that you got to do faster. Where can we leverage technology to help us, to give us reports, to analyze something, to do all those types of things? I would also encourage people, if you're not following me on social, go follow me on social. But what I talk about is my calendar. If it's not on my calendar, it doesn't get done. And what I do is I actually block off focus time in my calendar. I've got almost every day of the week a different focus time. And sometimes, like strat planning, I was just talking about, that was a 3-hour block for me to go through and do that on Tuesday. If you need time to sit down and review your web analytics, review your CRM data, figure out planning for your next event, put it in your calendar and block off the time. Dedicate your focus time to be able to move the needle on that task, that thing, that report, whatever it happens to be, so you can actually get it done.
I agree. Just going back to scarcity and abundance, you don't find time, you make time. There's no time to be found. And I do something similar where I block time just to get my own work done. I can hear all of my nonprofit friends and all my nonprofit clients saying, yeah, easier said than done. The thing is that I truly, truly believe, even though it's easier said than done, it doesn't mean it can't be done. And that you really can't afford to not do it. So if you want scarcity, the scarcity is if you don't do some strategic thinking and if you aren't planning strategically, you're actually losing time because you might be following tactics or scrambling to research more prospects instead of cultivating the relationships you already have. And so when you allow yourself to make the time to zoom out, think about relationships and that you don't have to do it all on your own, you have supporters. They're waiting for you to welcome them in. And it's really worth it. Again, easier said than done, but just because it's hard doesn't mean it can't be done. And that's why we offer tools that help them get it done, right? You've got digital tools. I have a framework. There's a lot of supports out there for those leaders to invite their supporters in.
Absolutely. There's a matter of giving it the importance and giving yourself the permission to say, I actually need a half hour tomorrow to do this thing. and then putting it in and making sure that it gets done. One of my little tricks is when I block off time in my calendar, I'll put something in my calendar to take care of, like I need to reply to this email or work on these proposals or whatever it happens to be. In the nonprofit space, I worked in nonprofits for 16 years. I totally get better said than done. I'm wearing 5 hats and I'm doing the job of 15 people. I get that. What I found though is putting an event in my calendar, I don't let myself move it more than one time. If I move it once, I'll put a little asterisk in the title so I know that I've moved it. If I have to move it a second time, then I question whether 1, it's something I need to do, 2, whether it's something important that has to get done, and 3, is there somebody else maybe that should be doing this? If it's like, you know what, this doesn't really need to get done. Cool, gone, see you later. Now I have a half hour to focus on something else that is important, or to go to this meeting that I got called into at the last minute, or, there's this crazy fire happening somewhere and I need to write a news release or whatever it happens to be. So I think it's important to use your calendar, but it's not carved in stone as well.
It's important that any structure is flexible, because if it's not flexible, then it just breaks. That's like goal setting, right? That's like appeals and event planning. You need to allow for some flexibility and some variability so that you can learn from it and grow with it. Otherwise, things just fall apart and break. It's too rigid. I believe that in the way we think about things. I reframe things a lot. And, just coming all the way back to the idea of strategic planning, I was asked recently 2 different organizations about helping guide them through a strategic planning process. And I really felt like they weren't ready for that. And that reframing the strategic planning to planning strategically and spending time creating a vision map really answered most of the questions that they were currently asking. So sometimes relying on what we are familiar with is more than you need. So putting one event on your calendar to get that one thing done might be enough than going through the whole strategic plan, doing a vision map and creating an immediate roadmap, and then figuring out different ways that your supporters can be involved and measuring that might be enough to move the needle.
Beth, planning strategically instead of strategic planning, flipping the words, I think that's really awesome. Amazing insights around strategy, engagement, data, and planning. I hope people listening to the show have been able to get some great advice and thoughts and some gold nuggets from you out of the conversation, and talk to one of your peers about it. Like, hey, I just listened to this episode, Beth said this thing, what do you think about it? Just have a conversation. You never know where that's going to go and how impactful that conversation will actually be. Beth, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what do they need to do?
Well, the easy way to find me is on LinkedIn. And if you just look for Beth Saunders, you should find me. Beth Saunders Associates is my consulting firm name. And to follow up on what you said, I love that challenge. And if you have a takeaway and you learned something, go digital and tell us about it. Share what your takeaways were and what your conversation were, and tag David and me. My website, you're welcome to book a time to just chat. I love bouncing ideas around and helping people think through issues. So BethSaundersAssociates.com, where you'll also find a downloadable free guide for strategic stewardship called MapMoveMeasure, your guide to strategic stewardship. So Beth Saunders Associates, MapMoveMeasure. Can't wait to see you online.
Amazing. Beth, thank you again so much for joining in. It's been great having you here on the Nonprofit Digital Success Podcast. To everybody listening, if you want the links to Beth's website, to her LinkedIn resources, the things that we've been talking about, head over to our podcast page at nonprofitdigitalsuccess.com. Click on this episode for all the details. And until next time, keep on being successful.